In this video, I'm going to talk about adding expenses in Wave, and I'm going to talk about the difference between adding it as a transaction, adding it as a withdrawal, versus adding it as a vendor bill. So first of all, to add it as a transaction, I'm going to do that on the transactions page, and I would just click on Add Transaction, Add Withdrawal, and I would enter the information. I'm adding a $300 repairs and maintenance expense. I would make sure I have the correct account as far as what account it was paid from. I could add any other details like the vendor, a description, notes. I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And I'm actually going to go to the checking account. And you can see by creating that $300 expense, it immediately deducted the $300 from the bank balance. And that was a really quick and easy process. I just entered the data really quickly, saved it, and that's all I had to do. Now, if I had the bank connected, it would have been even easier because that data would have been brought in for me, and I would have just changed the category or made sure the category was correct. And then I could, of course, add more details if I wanted to. Now let's look at a vendor bill. If I want to create a vendor bill, I would create the bill here under Purchases Bills. I would put in the vendor. I would put in any details of that bill, like the bill date, the bill due date. If I have a bill number, I would put that in here as well. And then I would either put an item from the products and services list or an expense category. I'm going to choose repairs and maintenance as the item, and that's connected to the repairs and maintenance category, so that fills in also. And then I would put in the price, and then of course I would add any other details I wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And that puts it on this page as an unpaid bill. I would have to record a payment to show that it was paid. So I would just put in the data, the amount, payment date, the account it was paid from, and any notes, and save. I'm not going to save this yet though, but this is how you would record a payment. And then when I record the payment, that's going to also show up under transactions. But right now, since I haven't recorded a payment yet, it doesn't show up here. So as you can see, creating an expense was quicker because it was just one step. Whereas if I create a vendor bill, this requires two steps because I have to record the bill and the bill payment separately. So creating expenses is going to be much quicker, much easier. Now, because creating expenses is easier and quicker, for a lot of your everyday expenses, you're probably going to create those as transactions, as expenses. For example, if you have a business lunch, you're paying for the meal at the same time you incur the expense of the meal. Or if you're paying for some sort of monthly subscription, then you're incurring the expense monthly and paying for it monthly. So basically those types of things that you're paying for immediately when you owe the money, immediately when you're incurring the expense, and there's no time lag between that expense and paying for it, then typically it's easier to record those as expenses. Because if you entered a vendor bill and a bill payment every single time you spent money on your business, this page would get really long, and that would be a lot of unnecessary extra work. So for the most part, you're most likely to record vendor bills when there's some sort of a time lag between the time you receive the bill or incur the expense in some way versus the time you pay that bill. And then a scenario where you might want to use vendor bills as opposed to expenses is when you want to track the unpaid or paid status in Wave. So if you receive a vendor bill and it might be a few weeks before you pay it, By entering the vendor bill here, you can come back to this page and see that you haven't paid it yet. So this could be a good place to keep track of what you've paid and haven't paid. So that would be one scenario to use vendor bills. Another scenario to use vendor bills is when you have some sort of contracted services that you want to track the details of. For example, if you're hiring contractors like this contractor right here, you can put a lot of detail in a vendor bill. You can put bill dates, due dates, bill numbers, notes. You can put the name of the customer they worked on. You could put the dates they worked, the hours they worked. You can put a lot of detail in here. Now you can put that detail in the expense. You can type all that in, but by putting it into a vendor bill, it's more intuitive because you have certain places to put certain data. And then this also gives you information as far as the bill number, the bill date, when you actually paid that bill. So this can give you a lot of detail so you have records of this in your accounting system. And then also it might be helpful when you're doing 1099s at the end of the year because you have all of the data here. For example, if I'm looking at Michael Masonry, I can sort for all bills from Michael Masonry, and that can help me drill down to the information I might need. So that's the sort of thing that I might use this for. And then another scenario where I might use vendor bills as opposed to expenses is if I'm using accrual-based accounting. Under cash basis accounting, you're recognizing and recording expenses as you pay them. So it's not going to matter whether you record them here when they're paid versus here when you owe them, because under cash basis, you don't necessarily have to track expenses incurred that you haven't paid yet. Whereas if you're using accrual-based accounting, you're recognizing and recording expenses as you incur them. So under accrual-based accounting, you're tracking expenses incurred even if you haven't paid them yet. So you would be more likely to use vendor bills under that scenario. And I'm just going to look at that difference real quick on the reports. If I go to the profit and loss, under accrual basis, it shows me repairs and maintenance of $550, which would be the total of the vendor bill that is owed, but it hasn't been paid yet, versus the expense that was deducted right from checking. So it's going to show me both of those. Whereas if I'm looking at cash basis, it's only showing me the $300 expense because the vendor bill hasn't been paid with cash yet. So that's the difference there. So just to summarize, most expenses, it's easier to add as an expense as a transaction here. But if you need to track your vendor bills for some reason, whether it's accrual basis accounting, whether you just want to track the unpaid or paid status, or whether you just want to keep up with the details of those vendor bills, then you would enter those as vendor bills. And that's all I wanted to cover today. I just wanted to give you a general idea of the differences between those two functions. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, and thank you for watching.